And we're live. Welcome, everyone. We're celebrating National Coding Week with live coding lessons throughout the week. I'm Mariana, Community Manager at Codecademy, and this is Ben, Senior Curriculum Developer at Codecademy, and you may remember him from Part 1. Today, Ben is going to teach you how to make your technical portfolio interactive using JavaScript. This is building on the first live stream of the week, which was on Monday, when Ben showed you how you can build a basic tech portfolio using just HTML and CSS. If you haven't watched that one yet, we do recommend you go back and watch it, especially if you're not familiar with HTML and CSS. This one will be recorded and it will be available for replay. For more details on our National Coding Week live streams, check out the link in our YouTube description. On Friday, we're actually going to be teaching you how to build out one of our most popular portfolio projects that explores NBA data. So you can check out our portfolio projects page on codecademy.com for more. As usual, ask questions in the chat. Curriculum developer Lucas and I will be here to answer any questions as they come up during Ben's lesson, and we'll also save some time at the end for a little bit of Q&A. This live stream, again, will be recorded, so it will be available for you, and I will hand it over to Ben. On to you, Ben.
Hey, everyone. Super excited to be back here talking about adding interactivity to our portfolio. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here so we can go ahead and get started. And we're going to pick off from where we left off at the end of the first live stream, plus a little bit extra content that we put in from some HTML and CSS. So looking over it, we'll see that we have the same core components before. We've got our bio, we've got our reactivity so that it adjusts to different sizing. We've just added another couple articles here, fleshed it out, and then added this header footer along with this very tempting dark mode button. This dark mode button does not do anything quite yet. We will be learning over the course of the lesson today how to make that button work and how it's interactive. I'm going to go ahead and share this link here of our starting point in chat so that anyone who is following along can see exactly where we are starting. Just looking at post-its in chat right here. So this is the workspace that I am starting with right now, and that we'll be building off of today. So before we go and add this interactivity and get right into figuring out how to make this dark mode button do something, we're going to want to take a little bit of a step back and go over how JavaScript works, which is one of the building blocks of the web. Over the course of the live stream today, we're going to go over what JavaScript is, how to use variables and conditionals and loops and functions in JavaScript to make things appear on a website that you're building. We'll then take that foundational knowledge and use it to add in some more of that complex features, like adding in that dark mode toggle. And if we have time, maybe we'll add another feature to kind of make this image fade away as we scroll down. But we'll see what we're able to get to over the course of the live stream today. So let's get right started. We're going to come back to actually building in this functionality for dark mode. We're actually going to mess around just with adding elements to the top of this page here to get a sense of what that interactivity should look like. So as we look at our file right here, we can see right at the bottom is this script tag. Inside the script tag, you can write JavaScript code, or you can have this source that says, when your website loads, go ahead and execute any of the code that's found inside the script file. Right now it's empty, so it's running, but we're not telling anything to happen when we start our website. The simplest way you can add some kind of interactivity is with what's called an alert. An alert will just go and make something appear as a pop-up window on the screen. So we can make something appear in here by having an alert and then put inside these parentheses what we want to be appearing. So we can say, hello, live stream. And now when we click save and run, a window pops up that says, hello, live stream. This message here is text that we can control. This one up here is the title that we can't control because it's a little bit of a security feature to make sure that we're looking at, so that we know what the source of the message is. So we've added something to add some interactivity. And this here is by using what's called a string. So anytime you have this quotation mark content, that's called a string. And that's one thing that you can be displaying or having as part of JavaScript. Other things you can display are things like numbers. So if you wanted to just have the number 4 and display that, that works fine as well. Now, these are some of the building blocks. And then within numbers, you can also use JavaScript to do things like arithmetic. So I could add, say, 2 plus 3, and then that result would display up here. The JavaScript is very powerful. We'll see a lot of different things we can do with it. Some of the simplest things it can do are things like arithmetic and then just displaying text. Moving on from just some of those basic operations, we can also use JavaScript to be storing values that we might want to use later. So instead of just adding 2 and 3 here, we can make a variable and then refer to that variable later on. So we could say have some number of apples and some number of bananas, and then refer to those variables inside an alert. And that here is going to then still display the same thing, but it's going to be using these stored variables. The advantage of that is we can then do operations as we're working on our logic. And I'm told that the alerts aren't actually coming up on the screen share, so that is good information. There are alerts coming up on them, so let me just reshare to show where they're coming from. That is a good piece of information. Okay, that's what the alerts look like as they're coming up. We have this alert that pops up and shows here. So we have alerts that are showing up when we go through these, and then we're also able to edit these variables to make something else show up. So if we have apples, say we could then change to a different value and say we don't have 2 apples, we only have 1 apple. An alert then is going to pop up that shows that we have 4 remaining, or 4 now instead of 5, because we lost 1 apple. There are 2 main ways that we can be, 3 main ways really, we can be declaring variables in JavaScript. We can be using these lets, which is a way of having a variable that can change. We can also define something that's called a const, which is a variable that's not supposed to change. We'll notice if we're making a variable that is a const and we try to change it, now nothing happens. We don't get an alert pop up as now. We don't get an alert that pops up at all here. So what we can do is figure out, why is it that this isn't working? Why is something happening that's wrong? Why is nothing showing up? We can use what's a very powerful tool, which is this inspect button, which will bring up what's called the developer panel here. Now there's a wealth of information and it's a little bit overwhelming, but we're just going to look at one piece of it. This here is the elements, which is, as you know from our session on Monday, is HTML that describes this website, which is the website we're using to build a website. So very meta. Then inside this console is a lot of error messages, nice little thing up at the top pointing to our careers page. And then down here is a place for any result where anything that goes wrong from JavaScript, as we can see a bunch of stuff here, will show up in this console. So when we go run this, it's going to tell us that there is some error, this uncaught type error, that's telling us what we did wrong. We tried to assign something to a constant variable, and constant variables aren't allowed to change. So if we fix this by turning it back to a let, then our alert will show up again. So this console is a great way to be debugging code. We might come back there if there's something that we're working on in JavaScript that isn't rendering correctly, and we can go fix and figure out what's happening there. Okay, so we have variables that we're able to go and edit here. Now, that's all well and good, but this doesn't do anything yet, right? We've seen that we can be having alerts come up. We can also be logging things directly. It's not just errors that kind of show up in the console. You can decide for debugging purposes if you want to make something appear just in the console and not as some alert. And we can see that text show up here. Now, that is one good strategy, but it doesn't actually edit our website. And having those pop-ups come up isn't a great learner experience or a great user experience, because that's, very pop-up spam kind of thing that you might have seen in the web like 10 years ago, or if you have a virus. So we want to add some more interactivity that makes text appear and allows us to manipulate a website with our JavaScript. Now, how do we do that? We're going to go ahead and start by just adding a paragraph, some new text up to the top of our page. The way we're going to do that is by accessing the document. This is an object, which is another building block of JavaScript, which is kind of like a thing, a unit. Some languages is called like a dictionary, but it's an object. It's a thing that we can use that has a lot of really useful properties and methods, which are all different ways that we can be accessing things inside of this document. So every document has a way that we can be generating new information. So if we want to create a new paragraph tag, we can do that by using this create element method. This is a method or a function in JavaScript. And so we'll go in a little bit later and figure out how to define them by ourselves. But for now, we know that we can use this dot to talk about something useful that we can do on this document. And then the useful thing we're going to do is we're going to create an element. These open and closed parentheses signify different arguments that we can put in the parentheses. In this case, it's what do we want to create? What kind of element? We're just going to put some text right up at the top. So we can do that by making a p tag, this para. Now, if we just run this here and get rid of this log, nothing's going to happen because we haven't told it to do anything. This is what's called imperative programming. It just executes top down, and the only things that happen are exactly the things that you say should happen. So we have just made this element, but we haven't done anything with it. The first thing we're going to want to do is store it somewhere. So we're going to use a const because we're not going to change it once we made it, and then assign it somewhere so that we can refer to it later more easily. Now that we have this new paragraph element here, we're going to want to give it some text so it can actually show up. So we're going to take this new paragraph, and then we're going to assign its text content to be something. This text content is a property inside of this element. In the same way that in the index.html, we had all of these different attributes, like a div could have a class inside of it, or these anchor links had hrefs. This is another way that we can be specifying additional information about something. The JavaScripty way of doing that is to be using what's called here is a property, which is kind of digging in a little bit further onto that element to get some more information about it. Okay, so now we can go ahead and add text content, something like this is new text. Now that we have our text, we actually need to do something with it because it's not going to show up unless we go ahead and actually edit some more information. So we'll go ahead then and then add this new paragraph to our body. So the easiest way to do that is to take this document object. One of its properties is the body, and then we can use a prepend method, which will go ahead and just add some new element right up at the top of whatever that HTML element is. We can then go ahead and prepend the new paragraph. When we run this here, we'll see that this text now appears right up at the top of the screen. And that's because we've gone and done all the steps. We've made something new. We've said what text should be inside it, and we've gone and added it to the top. Fantastic. So this isn't interactivity yet, but it's getting us to the right tools that we need in order to be editing and managing content. Okay, so now that we have the ability to add one piece of text, we can go even further. Because you might be looking at this and wondering, well, I could just do this very simply by going into the index and then just adding a paragraph tag myself. What's the point of doing it from this file right here? We can take advantage of powerful features from JavaScript like loops or control flow to specify things laid out differently. Let's imagine instead of just having one piece of text, we wanted to make 10 of them. We could do that by either inside the index HTML or here, doing a lot of copying and pasting. We could try to copy and paste this, except we'll get an error because our variables need to have the same, it can't have the same name. So we'd have to go and change this here, and we could go and copy, and we could go and paste again, and we could go change and update this here to have another paragraph, and we could repeat this another 7 times to end up with 10 elements. And that would work, but it'd be kind of a pain. It'd be a little bit exhausting to have to go through the process and figure that out. So one thing that we can do that'll make life a lot easier is instead of, and see, we even forgot to copy and paste something here. So it's really not a good practice to get into. So something that's a much better use case is instead to be using what's called a loop. I'm going to be going over a lot of concepts from JavaScript here, and I'll just preface this to say, if you're new to JavaScript, this might be coming very quickly, and that's okay. You should think of this more of as a survey of what you could do with JavaScript, and we have a lot more information for what you can do inside of our content. So everything that we're talking about here, we have an entire lesson just on creating variables, an entire lesson just on loops. So I'm summarizing a lot of information that's really valuable, but we have an in-depth look at that with a lot more practice opportunities on our platform. So with that, we can make a loop by using the for syntax, and then specify a variable that we want to start from our iteration, some just variable that we want to start off as. We then specify when should we stop iterating. We say we want it to stop once it's 10, and how much should I go up each time? This syntax is the same thing as saying that I should be assigned to whatever it was before plus one more. With this loop syntax, whatever is inside here is going to run 10 times. So we can take this same code and just embed it in this loop. And now we have 10 of these appearing. The power of that is that if we wanted to have 100 pieces of text appear at the top, instead of copying and pasting something 90 times, it's a single keystroke that will then have 100 pieces of text appearing right up at the top. So even though we're still working towards adding to some of that interactivity, this clearly is a very powerful way that we can make lots of changes to code for how we're setting it up without having to copy and paste things a lot. We can also use an additional feature of JavaScript called Conditionals, which is there in every language, in order to specify some more information about how this section look. Let's say we wanted some of the text to be green and some of it to be blue, red and blue, and we wanted it to be alternating. How could we structure that? Well, we can say that if it's an even thing, we want it to show up as one color, say red. And if it's an odd thing, we want it to show up as blue. So then as we go, we'll have, this is the 0th thing. So that could be red, then blue, then red, then blue, and so on and so forth. How can we do that? We can use a conditional and say that if the number is even, and what does even mean? We can use a neat operator in JavaScript called the modulo operator, which is this %, which means take the remainder from division. So this expression here says, if when you divide a number by 2, there's nothing left over. Another way of saying that is if the number is even. If it's even, then we want to be taking all this stuff, but we want to do something. We want to change its style. Well, how do we do that? We can access the style property on this, just like we can access the text content. So we can take this new paragraph that we've created, and we can call this set property method, which will then take one of its properties. We'll take this new paragraph, we'll go into its style, and then we'll set its property. We'll set its color to be something like, say, red. And then once we go and execute this, we'll be alternating between things that are unstyled, that have no specified color, and things that should be red. Now, we can see that everything went away. Now, if everything goes away at once, that means that you did something wrong with the JavaScript. One way of figuring out what that is to take a look at the console and then see if there is anything that is displayed as an error. And we can see right here that this says there's a uncaught piece of, there's a syntax error. We have some missing parentheses after a given line. So we can take a look at the line and say that that's on line 11. We can look at it and say that, oh, okay, so what we've done wrong here is that this here takes 2 separate arguments. We just try to kind of use the same CSS syntax, but set property actually wants 2 separate arguments, not just one thing that looks like CSS. And then when we run this again, we'll see that we have that alternating colors. Now, that was actually just a mistake I made, but I think that's really important to go through is A, developers make mistakes all the time, and B, using the console to figure out what that mistake was is a hugely important part of the development process. I expect we'll see other things that are kind of minor syntax things that crop up, but being able to open the console and look at what went wrong is a critical step about building websites with interactivity with JavaScript. Okay, so we've gone and set these alternating things as red. We could then go and set, if things are not even, then they're odd. So we could go ahead and set those to be blue. And now we have text that's nicely alternating here instead. Okay, quick question from chat I saw, which is that some people use var instead of let. Doesn't make a difference. It's a great question, and we've got a lot more information about that in our variables course. The kind of short answer is that const and let are both a little bit newer that behave more like other languages. Var is a way of creating something that can exist in a lot of different scopes. We'll get to that when we talk about functions, but the short answer is that vars can exist in surprising places, and const and lets will behave a little bit more like they do in other languages. If you're just using const and let for everything, you really can't go wrong. But if you have some specific behavior that you're trying to work on, then maybe adding var might make sense. Okay, so now that we've added this text here, that's all well and good, but we don't want to just, have a bunch of text appear. We want to get into that interactivity, kind of the real goal of where we started with this. Now, to add interactivity, we might want to click a button and then have the text appear. So we don't want it to all show up at once. We want to click on a button and then have more stuff show up every time we click on that button. That would be real interactivity. Now, how can we get that accomplished? Well, what we can do is we can, instead of having this in a for loop, we can wrap it inside of a function. We talked a little about functions here. This create elements is a function that takes in this p argument. The set property is a function that takes in what property we want to set and then the value we want to set it to. So we can also build our own functions. So we're going to make all of this be wrapped in a function that we're going to call add text to top. And that's just going to add some new text to the top. You'll note also we're still talking about this I, but it actually doesn't exist anymore since we got rid of the for loop. So what we can do is we can just define the I right up here and set it up equal to 0. And then once we execute this, we'll just go and increment I, so it's going up by 1. Minor note on this, you'll see a lot of syntax differences between people writing JavaScript. You can have semicolons at the end of lines in JavaScript, and you will find many style guides that encourage you to do that. It doesn't actually make a difference for the code executing. So as long as you're consistent, you can go ahead and then use whichever you prefer. You can use those semicolons or not use them. Okay, so now we have this function, which will, if we run, we're not executing the function, so nothing will happen. If we want this to actually run, we'll need to make sure we're calling the function. And we can see that we have now abstracted this in a function, so we can call it. And as we call it, it does the alternating colors and puts the text right up at the top. Okay, now that's all, again, well and good, but we don't want to just call this function. We want a button to show up. So let's finally get to adding some of that great interactivity. The first thing we're going to want to do is make a new button, which we'll just call button. And we'll use the same syntax, the way we write things up here, to make a button. So our button right here is going to also have some text inside of it. We can say that its text content should be something like maybe add text, because that's what it does. And then we can go ahead and put the button right up at the top. We'll get rid of these because we want this to be receptive to the what the user is typing in or clicking. And then when we run this, we see that we have the button appear right up at the top. Now, button doesn't do anything yet, right? We can click on it as many times as we want, but nothing happens. And that's because we haven't specified what kind of interaction should happen. We need to actually say, what happens when you click on the button? What should that behavior be? In JavaScript, the easiest way to know that a button has been clicked or some event has happened is to use what's called an event listener. Every property or every element, every object here has another property we can add to it, which is called add event listener. And this method that we're calling is going to take in what we're listening to and then what we should do once we found that that thing has happened. There are a bunch of different events that you can use. And again, you can look at documentation to get a sense of what all of those are. But some examples is you can find out when a scroll event happened, or when a click event happened, or when you've moused over something or moused off of something. For this, we're going to want to just pay attention to clicking. And then we're going to go ahead and whenever a click has happened, we're going to go and execute this function right here. So every time someone clicks, we run this add text to top. Great. So now we finally gotten to that interactivity. As clicks happen, more and more content gets added up to the top. Great. So we finally added some interactivity, but there's no real way of getting rid of any of this, right? So if we go and we add a bunch of text, we all this cluttering up here, and there's no way of getting rid of it. So something that we might be interested in doing is figuring out a way to get rid of all of this text that comes up. We can do that by adding another button that's going to get rid of it. Clicking this save and run will get rid of it, but that's something that only we can do as the builders of the website. It's only the right panel that someone's actually going to get access to if they were really looking at it as something that was live. So we can add another button that's going to try to delete some of these elements. Now, we could add another button by taking all of this code here, copying it, and then making a new button. But one thing I really want to emphasize that we saw before is anytime you find yourself copying and pasting a lot, there's probably a better way to do it. There's a really important concept in coding called dry code, which stands for don't repeat yourself. And the idea is that anytime you're writing the same thing out, there's a possibility for A, errors to come in, and B, it's a lot harder to maintain. So instead of having a new button that we just make by copying, we're going to take the important elements of this and abstract it into a function, which is just going to be called add button. Inside this add button function, we're going to go and execute this code. Now, add button as it's written here, which we could run, is only going to be adding this specific add text button. If we want to add a different button, we need a way of specifying that. One way we can do that is by adding different parameters inside this function so that when we're calling it, just like we can create any kind of element, we can create a P element or a button element or an H2 element. We could also go and create buttons with different text and different behavior. So how can we do that? We can, in our add button function, we can go and specify what we want the text of the button to be, and then what we want the behavior to be when someone has clicked on something. So we'll then replace anything that's specific to this add text button with this property we've made here. So this add text is actually the button text, and this behavior is on click. Then when we're adding a button, we can go and say that we want it to have the text of add text and the behavior of add text to top. Nothing's changed, and that's a good news because that's what our refactoring was trying to do, is figure out how can we go and make this a little bit more reusable without changing its behavior. So now behavior is exactly the same, but we have this add button that's a lot more generic. So we could add a different button. Let's say we wanted to call this remove text. And then for now, let's just give it this because we don't know what else we're doing yet, but we'll figure that out. We'll see now then a new button shows up. So we can then add text, and we have this other button that for now is called remove text, but actually just adds more text because it's the same function that we've defined here. We actually want to get rid of text. We don't want to add text. We could go and define a new function. So we could totally go ahead and then define a new function here called remove text, but we're going to do it inline here using what's called an arrow function. This syntax is kind of like making a little inline throwaway function that we can use just this one time, and then we're not going to be using it from a different context. You'll see this a lot, this kind of fat arrow syntax in JavaScript. It's the same thing as this here, just written out a little differently. Whatever goes in here are the arguments you want to put in. This arrow just shows that you're writing a function, and then you have these curly braces, just like we have in this function here. So what should remove text do? Well, we want to find the things we just made and then get rid of them. We could find just paragraph tags, but we have other paragraph tags that we might not want to get rid of. So we'll need a way of specifying just these bits of paragraph tags. One way we can do that is when we're building these paragraphs, we can be assigning it a class, and then we'll have one grouping of things that we can get rid of. And we saw how to use classes in the last live stream, where we could use them from our CSS, from our different CSS rules to specify that some things should look different than other things. To add something to its class list, we can go ahead and then add add dot class list, and just double check the syntax on that. Okay, dot class list dot add, and then put in the new class we want to put in. So something like generated text. By itself, this changes no behavior. This is just adding this to whatever classes we have. I'm doing this instead of just doing new para.class and assigning it to something, because that would wipe out any other classes that it might have. So this is a nice way you can just go to add behavior that doesn't get rid of anything. Okay, a good question from Chad. In reference to arrow functions, is it like a lambda kind of thing? Yeah, exactly. So these are like, in some languages, like in Python, these are just called like lambdas, which are just kind of throwaway functions that you can write. So the syntax for it's going to depend on the language, but the behavior is that this is some kind of function that you can be writing that's a throwaway. It's an anonymous function, as it's called in other languages. Okay, so now that we have our, where were we here? Okay, now we have our class added, we can go ahead and then figure out how to grab these classes and then get rid of them. So how do we do that? Well, we can go ahead and then grab these classes. Now, we saw in the last live stream this selector syntax that we can grab things with like the body tag, or we can be using this dot, which we'll have somewhere here, to grab everything with the specific class. There's a way of having these same selectors in JavaScript. We can go and call on the document has something which is called a query selector. And a query selector is going to go and kind of run this CSS query to find everything that matches. So we can call a query selector and then pass in what it is that we want to be getting rid of. So here we can go and pass in to say anything that has the class that matches generated text, we'll go and we want to get rid of those. So we can say let para is equal to this, and then every element just has a remove method, which will just go and get rid of it. Okay, when we save and run, we now have this add text that shows up. And if we click remove text, we'll see something go away, but maybe not everything. And so that is what happened. We saw only one of the things go away. Well, why is that? It so happens that in JavaScript here, query selector by itself will just get the first of the things that matches this description. So if we click on remove text, it'll find the first thing with this class, and then it will go and save that to this para here. Well, we probably want to get rid of all of them, not just one of them. If we want to do that, we'll need, and we'll see that we got some weird behavior also cropping up here. But if we want to do that, then we'll need to go and to use this query selector all syntax instead. This will then save all of the paragraphs inside what's known as an array for this para's property. Now, what does that look like? Well, let's just take a look at, let's see if an alert works, otherwise we'll log it. So as we go and add stuff and then click this, it'll tell us that we have an array. That's what this open and close syntax is, of some objects. A very common thing when working with JavaScript is this kind of like object or object something. And that's what this is here. It's telling us we have an array of stuff, which is good enough. We know we found something. So now that we have this array here, we want to go through every object and then get rid of all of the existing nodes that match inside this array. There's a few different ways we could do that. One of them is to use what's called a for loop here, which I don't think we've had a chance to see yet. And we can go through every para of this paras, and then take this para and remove it, or para is short for paragraph. Then we add text, and when we click remove text, it will run this for every paragraph inside there, and everything will go away. So there's lots of other syntax that you could use, but this is a compelling way to be getting rid of a bunch of stuff all at once. Okay, so we've seen a lot so far just from JavaScript review. We've taken a look at some basic variables, and that we can be defining those. Those can be constants, those can be variables. We can use alerts to make things show up. We can use console.log to make things appear over on the right panel. We take a look at how we can use different methods on things like the document to create elements, store them in variables, access and edit their properties, use conditionals to be going and setting behavior depending on characteristics, abstracting behavior out to functions, and then running those functions in order to have certain effects. That's a lot of content, and if some of this is still coming very fast, that's okay. Again, we have a lot of information on our platform that goes through this. I did think it's important to just give that very high-level overview before we get into the good stuff, which is, wait a second, I thought we were going to look at the dark mode and edit our website. How can we get to that? So that's what we'll get to right now. I'm going to take all of this good stuff that we've written, and instead of just deleting it, I'm actually going to make a new file here. I'm going to call this something like add buttons. And then I'm going to take all of the content from this file and then delete it by cutting it with Control X, and then just pasting in here with Control or Command V. So now I have this file has all the content and not this file. When I go click Save and Run, these buttons go away. And that's because in this index.html file, it's reading specifically from this script and running that code. If we wanted to, we could add a different script, and that could be executing the code we have inside this add buttons.js, and then our buttons will appear again. So there's lots of scripts that you could be adding, and very rarely would you want all of your JavaScript code to be in a single file. So it's very important to know how to build multiple files and use that to do what you're interested in. For this example, we're just going to stick with actually editing this file instead. Okay, so now let's take what we learned and figure out how can we build some kind of dark mode with this as we have it here. We see that we have this toggle that we added. We didn't talk about toggles last time, but they're fairly simple elements. It's just a checkbox that we're calling toggle. And when you click on it, we have some real fancy CSS rules set up so that when it's checked, it's going to take this dot and it's going to move it 26 pixels. So this kind of looks like, this is still interactivity, but it's just displaying the check in like a different spot depending. So this, we can make it go way over to the right if we wanted to, whenever we click on it, and that's going to jump all the way over there. So I encourage you to look through it because there's a bunch of nice fancy CSS properties that make this look the way it does. But we're going to be focusing on just treating this like it's a simple toggle and then making something happen. Okay, let's go back to our script. And now we're going to want to go inside here and be editing it so that it's changing our background color. We've seen a lot of the steps that we already need to go ahead and get that started. The first thing we're going to want to do is do something when this toggle is clicked. So we're going to go ahead and grab this toggle by using a query selector to get that toggle. So we're going to go call this toggle, going to go into the document, we're going to use our query selector, and then we're going to want to grab this toggle here. Now, how do we actually grab it? We could try to just grab all of the what are these here? Like all of the divs that match this, right? And that would kind of work, but it'd be a little inelegant. A better way to do it is this has an ID set, so there is only one dark mode toggle. We looked before at classes, which we have as well here, and a lot of things can be the same class. Like we could have multiple article images, and we do in this piece here, but we only want one dark mode toggle. So an ID is a way of kind of specifying a class that only applies to exactly one element. So we can go inside of our script and then use the selector for IDs, which is this hashtag here, to get this dark mode toggle, which is called dark mode toggle like this. So that's going to give us our toggle. Once we have it, we can then use what we saw from before to just add an event listener. You can add click event listeners for anything. It doesn't just have to be buttons. It could be images or texts, but usually you're going to want to make sure for your users it's something they know they should be clicking on. So we're going to add an event listener, and that's going to be looking for click events, not clock events, but click events. And then it's going to do something once we find one. Now, what should we do? First, let's just make sure that we've set this up correctly. Let's just go and alert that we did something. So when we click on this, we can see that it's showing up with this object here, telling us that we did in fact find some object. Great. So we know that we're successfully interacting with this page here. Now, we want to go and change the background color. What do we want to change it to? Well, we have this Figma here, and we can share this link again in chat. but this has a good mock-up for what a dark mode and a light mode can look like. You'll notice between them, the dark mode has the text color as the background color, and the background color of this is the text color here. And then we just change these images from being this blue color to this green color. That's pretty much all we're going to use this for. It's just getting the colors that we want to be setting our dark mode to. So we're going to do a simple thing first. That's not going to quite work, and then we'll build off of it to get the behavior we want. Let's say that we want to set the background instead to be this color, which was the text color before. We can go ahead and take the document's body. We can go to its style, and then we can be going and setting its property here. So we can go and set the property, and then the property we want to set is background, and then we want to set it to this color that we found right here. When we run this, we can see that it does in fact change all of the background to this color. It can't really read anything yet, and clicking this doesn't do anything again because we only told it to go one way. So we could go instead, and we could go back. So we could say that we can go from if the toggle is checked, then we want to make it dark. Otherwise, we want to make it light. So already seeing using some of that conditional here to get access to what we're interested in. Okay, so we can go then and grab, let's see, this color here, which is the same as the background color over here, and then grab that. Now, when we run this, we'll see that we're setting the color here to dark. And when we click it again, we're going to go ahead and set it over back to light. So this kind of works, but isn't quite the behavior that we're looking for. So what can we do to change the behavior to look a little bit more like we're expecting? Well, the main problem is that all of this text isn't the right color, right? So we want to go ahead and fix the color to make it show up in this proper dark mode like we have styled here. Now, a problem with that is there's a lot of different kinds of text that we want to have to show up. And there's nothing stopping us from going and just setting all of the H2s and all of the paragraphs and all of the list items and all of the strong tags and all of the bold tags manually. But that's a really annoying process, and there's a couple of problems with it. First, it's a lot of work, and I don't want to do a lot of work. So that's a problem. But second, if we go through that and we add in setting properties for every other kind of query selector that we find, we might miss one. Maybe we forgot that this was a strong tag and we just didn't include it. We then would have this one stubborn thing that didn't participate in our dark mode. That'd be a problem, right? Or we might even catch everything, but then someone goes back to the website and then goes and changes something by adding in an H4. Maybe we didn't have an H4 before. Now we have to go and edit our JavaScript as well to go and include that manually. That's not a great flow from a development perspective because it's very easy for those things to get out of sync. So we're going to want to find a more robust way of handling that. Another problem is the use of this here is kind of what's called a magic value, which means where does this come from? This is just an arbitrary color that's in our JavaScript. It's very easy for this to be wrong, or if we're using it in a bunch of different places, it's hard to change if we're just copying and pasting it a lot. And it's hard for a design team that's working mainly with CSS to get that. So quick question from chat, I think that's good, is what am I using to get color? Figma actually just has an add-on to get that. So if you just click on Figma and you've built something, you can just click on the color and it copies. I also have this nifty little add-on, which is just a eyedropper color picker tool. And that lets me go and just grab colors from web pages, and it just goes and puts this up here. It's a fun way if you just want to match the exact colors from something, you can use a tool like this. Okay, so let's go ahead and fix both of those problems. First, we want a centralized place for all of these different properties to be living. To accomplish that, we're going to use what's called a CSS custom property or a CSS variable. All of our colors are spread out all over the place. We have some in our footer, we've got some even in our toggle switch that are just these hard-coded color values. Instead, we want to be putting them in one centralized place so we can save them in one fell swoop. The way that we're going to do that is by using a CSS variable. Just like JavaScript has variables, CSS has variables as well. So we want to define a background, a primary, I should say, and a link color here that is all going to be in one place, so we can just change these properties and have everything else change. Okay, how do we do that? Well, let's take the background color that we know and put it right here. We'll take the primary color of text and put it here. And then we'll take the link color, which we've got right down here, and set this here. The syntax to define a CSS variable is this kind of 2 dashes. And then to use a CSS variable, you have the var keyword, then open parens, and then this same text here with those 2 dashes in front. So we're just going to go through this entire document and replace everything with this color with this variable, so we can change it all at once. We could do it by scanning. That sounds like a lot of work. I don't want to do that. So we're just going to use find and replace. So we're going to go ahead and replace all of these, this color here with instead a variable that's going to point to our background. And then we can just go through and edit each of them as we see them. So we can see that we've got this color here. We can update that, can update that, can update this one, and this one will stay the same because this is where we're defining what that background is. As we run this, we'll see that nothing changed, which is exactly what we want because we're just moving all of the colors to a place where we can add them a little bit more easily. So we can do that with the background color. We'll do the same thing with the primary color. So anytime we see this color, we want to replace it with a variable that points to primary. So we'll go ahead and replace this one, and this one, and this one, and this one, and keep this one, so we only have one left. And I believe there's also some of the primaries hiding in, or I guess there's some backgrounds hiding in here, so we can fix those as well. So let's go and grab our style here, and we want to replace in here with a variable that points to our background. It looks like, nope, I'm wrong. Sorry, these are primary. They're kind of flipped. So we're going to replace these with our primary. Great. So we'll go and replace them in this other CSS file. So just like you can have multiple JavaScript files, we happen to have multiple CSS files here. Okay, check to make sure. Great, looks the same. And then we'll do the same thing here for our link color. Is we'll take this and we'll find and replace out so that all of these links here are replaced instead with a variable that's pointing to our link. So we can replace and replace and replace, and we'll keep that one. Okay, we've done a little bit of refactoring work, but the advantage now is we've centralized all of these definitions. So if we wanted to make our link color, say, red, now all of our links appear red because we've gone and edited them all at once. So if we can just figure out how to be changing these properties here, then we're well on our way to be figuring out how to be editing what we want to be editing. Now, we could just be changing these backgrounds, but we don't actually have anywhere to be saving our dark mode settings yet. So we're actually going to copy this a couple times, and we're going to define not just our background here, but we're going to have our dark background, primary, and link, and our light background, light primary, and light link. These we're not going to change, and we're going to keep in our CSS file as a way that we can be permanently referring and grabbing the appropriate values that we're interested in. So let's go ahead and fix these colors. We know that our dark background is actually this color. Our dark primary is this lighter color, and our dark link color is whatever this green is, which is this color right here. Okay. And as one last step, instead of these being hard-coded, we can actually use variables here to be pointing with one more level of indirection. So these can point to our light backgrounds to start. And now a lot of refactoring work, but it's a way that's going to be a lot more compelling and easy to change and a lot more readable for anyone who's looking at how we're defining each of these things. Light, link. And this is light primary. Okay, nothing's changed, which is good. But now if we just change all of these lights to darks, then we'll see that we have one place where we can be going to change these. And it looks like we got one of them wrong here. So let's take a look. Our background doesn't look quite right here. Let's make sure we got our dark background correct. So we want actually no, the background's fine. The text didn't update correctly. Okay, so our dark primary text looks like it didn't update. So let's go ahead and figure out why that's the case. So we have our dark primary here. We want to set this. Let's go make sure we have the right color. Let's grab this in here. Okay, let's see. Quick, if anyone in chat has anything to pop in for this before we get blocked too much, because I want to go on and get on to our other good stuff here. Let's see. We have our dark primary, which doesn't look like it's set correctly for our body color. Because if we change this, we should have the right color that we're interested in. Yeah, it looks like something's overwriting. It's a little funky. Let's see. Let me take a quick look at chat, see if there's any good suggestions. I know we're running on time, so I do want to get to the last couple steps we have on this. I missed a hyphen in dark primary. Thank you. So let's take a look. We have our dark primary. Where's our missing hyphen? Oh, thank you. Syntax, very important. So we can see that we're actually not reading any of this right now because we're missing one of these dashes at the beginning. And now we have the primary color working. So thank you, chat. On line 22, we had a missing little dash here, and that threw everything out of whack. So good emphasis. Syntax, super important, and it's very easy to kind of get one little thing wrong and have everything not be functioning correctly. So that's just a matter of practice there, but appreciate all the comments in chat. That is exactly what we're missing there to make that not functioning. Okay, so now that is our dark mode, but we want to go ahead and figure out a way that we can be changing that when we click on the button instead. Let's go back to our JavaScript file here. And we're going to actually build a little wrapper that's going to make our life easier here. So we're going to go and then we're going to add a class that's going to help us be getting and setting these values. Again, a lot more information about classes, but I want to just kind of introduce it as something that'll make our syntax a lot nicer here. So we can add a class that's called CSS prop control. It's going to take in its constructor an element, and then we'll be assigning that as some element it's going to use later on. This CSS prop control is going to have a way that we can get the computed property associated with any particular variable name by using this get computed style, which is going to grab whatever element we've given it and then get the property value associated with whatever variable name. We can then define a setter that's just going to go and assign whatever variable name to some given value. We can then, by grabbing the element associated with this, grabbing its style, just like we saw right here, and then calling set property to be assigning the var name to a given value here. Okay, so a lot of kind of structure we're adding, but it's going to be useful to make it a lot less verbose as we're actually writing code. We can then build our body CSS props and assign it to be a new CSS prop control. And we'll pass in the body that we're working with here, the document's body. Okay, now when we're adding these properties, once this goes and refreshes, we'll go and want to be changing each of these properties once we've clicked on something. All we really need to do is assign the background to either dark mode or light mode, depending on what the current mode is. So let's grab the current mode by taking the mode and assigning that to be, if the toggle is checked, then we want it to be dark mode. And if the toggle is not checked, then we want it to be light mode. We could do this just using an if statement as well. This is called a ternary, which is just a one-line way to write a conditional statement. Then we're going to want to go ahead and be setting these CSS props. So this body CSS props, we're going to want to set the background, and that's that 2 dash background. And the thing we're going to want to set it to is whatever either the light mode is or the dark mode is, depending on this mode right here. So we're going to go ahead and then take the body CSS props. We'll grab one of the variables, and we want to just grab from the CSS either this dark background or this light background. So we can do this inside here by using what's called this template string with these backticks, and then put in 2 dashes to show the variable we want. This syntax here, where we can put our mode in, which is either going to be light or dark, and then say that we want to grab the background. So now we're checking to see if the thing is checked, and then we're setting its background once we go and click it. And we can see it alternating here between light or dark. We can do this with each of the properties. So we did this here with the background. We can also do it with the primary. And we can also do it with the link. And now, when we go and click on this here, we see that everything updates to that nice dark mode that we were looking for. So we can see all of those 3 things updating. Okay, couple last things of review to highlight. We saw a lot of things over the course of this. We really just touched on some elements, especially classes. Do want to emphasize we have a lot of great information on codecademy.com that goes more in depth into each of those elements. I also want to emphasize that as you're working through something, a frequent part of development is things not working correctly and going back and fixing it. And so it's a vital part of being a developer is to go through and use the console and to be reading things over to make sure that you're finding whatever syntax mistakes you make, because that flow is 100% what a developer is a process of not getting things quite right, iterating, and then figuring out how to get to the solution that you're looking for. So we've ended up with a great portfolio website right here where you can be taking this as a template, adding your own projects, customizing what your dark mode might look like, and you now have some of the tools to add other kinds of interactivity if you're interested in customizing this in any other way that you want. So thanks everyone for these couple last live streams. I've really enjoyed getting to build these things out in front of everyone, and I'm excited to see what you'll all build as part of Codecademy. So with that, I'll kick it back to Mariana.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Ben. And thank you to everyone who joined us today. As a reminder, our last live stream on Friday is all about creating a portfolio project that will actually go into this portfolio that you've built. If you have any questions about part 1 and 2 of building your portfolio, join the conversation in the community forums. We'll drop a link in the chat. As far as the project, it's a data science project in which you'll analyze 538 NBA data. We also have a really fun announcement next week for people excited about Web3, so stay tuned for that. And for more, follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter to stay up to date. See you Friday.